I didn't do that. I seriously didn't. That must have done that, right? Pastor Luke,
Hello.
Good afternoon. As you can see, this is lesson 24.
On pages 97 to 100.
To 100. We are using a different program for this, so if you heard a sound like that, or just because I'm so excited about this lesson, go. Lesson 24,
Yep.
Jesus Passion. Let me take that Jesus Passion thing off of there now. Okay. It still says lesson 24
Yep.
in your handwriting.
In my slanted handwriting.
Yeah.
As you can see, this lesson is called Jesus' Passion. So when you hear the word passion, what do you think of?
Well, that's what so I'm pulling this up. Here's the question in the book, Pastor Luke.
So we're on page 97.
Yeah.
What is the word? How do we use this word in English?
Well, usually if it's something that I'm passionate about, I mean, I'm going to show emotion. Let's see. I'm passionate about the Purdue Boilermakers. And because of that, I'm going to stick with them even when times are tough. And when times are great, I'm really excited.
Yep.
Is that?
I think that's generally how we use it.
Yeah.
In English anyway. Also, there's I think a lot of times we associate it with like really strong love for
Oh, okay.
your significant other.
He loved her passionately.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's typically those two ways are how we typically
Right.
think of the word. But you were looking up its origins.
Yes.
So it's a Latin word.
Comes from the Latin, it says, and I just remember this, it means actually to suffer.
Suffer.
Yeah. So Jesus' passion has to do with Jesus' suffering.
In suffering, there are certainly strong emotions in suffering.
Yeah. Like, I don't want to do this.
Yeah. So it connects.
Yeah.
And we can talk about Jesus' love for us. He experienced his passion because of his love for us. So I think it all fits in one way.
I hope it'll tie together well.
Yeah. So, talking about Jesus' passion, so we understand the word a little bit more. What exactly is, in Jesus' life, what time period is this?
Well, I think usually, and as we look at this, so the lessons that we've done, the last few have been Jesus' early ministry, Jesus' middle ministry, Jesus' later ministry. So Jesus' passion now is, I think, usually narrows down to a 1 week period. We could argue his entire life is one of passion. I think we can say that. But usually I think as we've been moving in our lessons here, 21, 22, 23, now 4, we're at the last period of Jesus' life before he ascends into heaven, is raised from the dead and ascends into heaven.
Yeah, so this, if you turn to the top of page 98, it says Passion Week there at the top. Under Digging Deeper, it says Passion Week. I don't know if we typically call it Passion Week. We usually call it Holy Week. So, as you said, this is the week leading up to and includes Jesus' death and resurrection.
Yeah.
So, Holy Week, Passion Week.
Yes.
And so there are a number of episodes that happened during this week, and we're going to be taking an overview of these main events. And so you can see these on page 98 and 99. There's going to be 6 main events that we're going to take a brief look at. And, yeah.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out, that's I was wondering if it was going to be 7 events, because that would be a biblical thing, and it has to do with a week. But I think number 7 is going to probably be in the next lesson.
Probably.
Yeah.
Yep. So the first one, so again, on pages 98 and 99, there's going to be 6 main events that we're going to be looking at. And it uses the map on the top of page 99, which is an aerial view of Jerusalem during the time of Jesus.
I'm going to pull that up here, Pastor Luke, here. So let me move
so there
this.
you go.
I'll move us a little, make us smaller.
So using this map, we'll be able to locate where these events happened. So again, this is a map of Jerusalem during Jesus' Passion, during Holy Week.
It was probably like that the week before it, too.
Yeah, it was actually like that.
For quite a while.
Quite a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, because this goes back to Jerusalem is the place where God says he's going to dwell, and ultimately it's King King David wants to build a proper house for God, but God says, no, Solomon's going to do that. And they build it in Jerusalem at the Temple Mount, right? You always go up to Jerusalem, right?
Yeah. Jerusalem is on a ridge, so you always go up to it.
Yeah.
You know, speaking of King David, when David lived in Jerusalem, it was just the bottom. That was the only part of the city, and then Solomon expanded it to where the temple is, to the north of that, and then Hezekiah really added it to all the stuff that's on the left side. That's when it really.
So when you say the bottom right corner, let me see if I can make a mark here. Okay, we're back.
We're back. So, moving on to number 2, the Lord's Supper.
Yes.
So this is on the Thursday of that week. Now, this was there was a big celebration going on in Jerusalem at this time called the Passover. So this is what the Jews celebrated every year around this time. This is where they celebrate when God led the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt.
Right.
They celebrate the Passover meal, so they have the unleavened bread, all that stuff. And so Jesus is celebrating the Passover with his disciples. So this is a normal thing that they would have done. It's kind of like what we celebrate Thanksgiving every year.
Right.
This is a holiday that they would have celebrated every year. And so it's a very festive time. This is another reason why there's a ton of people in Jerusalem at this time. And so Jesus celebrating this special holiday with his disciples, but then he does something new. He does something pretty special. He institutes what we call the Lord's Supper, which, by the way, we are making videos on if you are interested.
Yeah, that's right. And
teaching about the Lord's Supper.
Yeah, that's always good to check those out.
Yeah.
So, and you can see the scripture reference here from Luke 22 to get into more detail. But if you're in worship, you hear this. If you alternated services, you'd hear it every week. Every time we have the Lord's Supper, we hear the words that Jesus said when he started or instituted the Lord's Supper.
Yep. So he took bread and he says, "This is my body. Eat it." And he takes a cup of wine, says, "This is my blood. Drink it."
For the forgiveness of sins.
For the forgiveness of sins.
Yeah.
And so the Lord's Supper is a sacrament. So again, we talk more about what a sacrament is in these other videos that we're making. But Jesus institutes and establishes one of our sacraments, the Lord's Supper here. Pretty special and significant, a huge thing for the church moving forward. But we could spend a lot of time talking about the Lord's Supper. But this is where Jesus starts it, begins it. It's a very special moment. I'm sure the disciples had no idea what was going on until afterwards. But this is where it started. So then moving on to number 3.
Number 3, let me move it back. I'll put it on full screen here momentarily.
So number 3, so after they celebrate the Passover, after Jesus establishes the Lord's Supper, communion with the disciples, they go to the Garden of Gethsemane. So if you look on the map, that's on number 3. So it's on the top right part of the map. And so Jesus goes there to this garden. The garden is on the Mount of Olives, so it's the same area. He goes there to pray. Now, why? Jesus is God.
Yeah.
Why does he need to pray?
Because he loves his dad. And he knows his dad loves him. And he knows that he has come for a specific purpose. And this has to do with his passion, his suffering. Because he knows he has to suffer, he still wants to talk to his dad about it. Like, is there another way?
Yeah. So, like you said, Jesus knows what's about to happen, that he's going to experience excruciating, terrible pain, all this stuff. And he's praying to God the Father, God, if there's another way, please make it happen.
Right.
Because Jesus is God, he's also a human being.
Yeah.
And as human beings, we're created to be in communication with God, to pray. especially during difficult, awful times.
Yeah, we should never be afraid to talk to God. I mean, ideally, we wouldn't be afraid to talk to God.
Yeah.
And so even in this thing that's really tough, like, Dad, I know you want me to do this. I still need to talk to you about it.
Yeah.
Because I'm afraid, or I don't want to go through it. Because suffering is not usually pleasant.
No, that's
The
why it's
opposite.
suffering.
Yeah, yeah.
And so Jesus, again, he knows what everything that's about to happen, and really does not want to do it.
Yeah.
Because he knows it's gonna hurt a lot. But he concludes his prayer with, "Not my will, but yours." And so even though Jesus is struggling to go along with this, he still submits himself to God the Father's will, because he knows this is what God the Father wants for Jesus to do, and he submits to it.
Yeah, I just wrote a little reminder up there.
Yeah.
Because I think all along the way, it's going to be, I don't want to have to suffer. Because most of these, now the Last Supper, the Lord's Supper, the Last Supper sometimes called, I guess there was some suffering there, but it's not the overt physical suffering. It might be the suffering to know that Judas betrays him, and to see that come to fruition. But when and Palm Sunday is probably not as much suffering, even for the donkey, because they've got a strong back.
Yeah.
But most of the rest of it, there's a lot of suffering.
Yeah, well, and even as Jesus is praying, I mean, he's emotionally struggling with all that. I mean, Luke even says that he is so emotional that he's sweating blood.
Right.
And I think physically you have to be in a really tough place to be, for that to happen, for you to sweat blood. And his friends are there, his disciples are with him, but they're passed out sleeping. They can't even stay awake to be with Jesus, to support him in this difficult moment.
Right.
So he's suffering, not just physically, but also emotionally, spiritually. I mean, everything. He's suffering it all.
Yeah. I did something and made ourselves go away.
Oh, okay. Well, it's at the Garden of Gethsemane that Judas Iscariot brings the temple guards. He leads them to Jesus. He points out Jesus by greeting him with a kiss, and that's when Judas really betrays Jesus, and Jesus is arrested at this moment, and all the disciples scatter and leave him. So we're still on number 3.
I was getting ready for number 4, though.
Yep. So Jesus, after he prays, he's arrested, and that leads us to number 4.
Okay, now I'm going to go to number 4.
Yep.
Let me move this.
So Jesus is brought to the Jewish religious authorities, the high priest, Caiaphas, but also Annas, two religious leaders, and they try Jesus. And this is where we find out that Peter, he follows them, and I'm sure most of us are familiar with the story that Peter denies knowing Jesus. 3 times, people are like, "Hey, you were with Jesus, weren't you?" And he's like, "No, I don't even know the guy." And so Peter denies Jesus 3 times. And then the rooster crows.
Only one time, apparently, though. The rooster doesn't crow each time.
Oh, yes.
I sometimes get confused about that. Like, does the rooster crow 3 times? And I knew Peter denies, but it's not. He denies the first time, the second time, the third time, and then cock-a-doodle-doo.
Yep. And then actually Luke tells us that Jesus must have been pretty close, because Jesus actually turns and looks at Peter, and Peter at that moment knows what he did, breaks down.
He's crushed all the more.
Because he knows that he has also betrayed Jesus.
After he said he wouldn't, in fact, he said, "I will die."
Yep. So absolutely crushed. You know, if you've ever let somebody down, you know how awful that feels.
Yeah.
That's what Peter's experiencing to a very great degree.
Yeah.
And so at this time, Judas also realizes what he's done has been wrong, and he goes because he betrayed Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. He throws the money back, like, "I've betrayed innocent blood." And he is so overwhelmed with guilt that he goes and hangs himself.
Yeah.
He commits suicide.
That's just sad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is tragic for both of them.
Yeah.
So, all right, number 5. So this is Jesus before the council, what's called the Sanhedrin. So this is all the religious leaders, Jewish religious leaders. Most of them don't like Jesus. There's a few that do follow Jesus, but most of them don't. And they accuse Jesus of lots of false things. And eventually, I think it's Caiaphas asks him, "Are you the Son of God? Are you God?" Is basically, "Are you God?"
Yeah. He doesn't say God, though. He avoids it.
Oh, yeah.
Because they're afraid to say the name of God. The Most High or something.
Yeah, "Are you Son of the Most High?" or something like that. And Jesus' response is, "Yes, I am God."
Jesus hardly says anything.
Yeah, he doesn't speak
time.
a whole lot, which
Yeah.
is kind of strange. But if you think about it, every time Jesus got into a conversation with the Pharisees, Sadducees, he always owned them.
Right.
But here, for the most part, he keeps his mouth shut. He doesn't say a whole lot. And when he does say that I am basically God, to the Jewish leaders, that's blasphemy.
Yeah.
And the punishment for blasphemy is death.
And usually they would stone someone, but they didn't actually want to kill him themselves.
Well, and they actually weren't legally.
They couldn't.
They couldn't, because even though we're in Israel, these are the Jewish leaders, there's somebody else in charge of the area.
Right.
And that would be the Romans, and that leads us to number 6. The Romans are the ones that are in charge of everything here, and Pontius Pilate is kind of like the governor here, and so he's the only one that has the authority to execute someone. So that's why the Jewish leaders, the Sanhedrin, they have to take Jesus to Pilate in order to get him to be executed. And it's interesting, Pilate sees through the whole thing. He's like, yeah, Jesus might be a little weird, but he hasn't done anything wrong. It's because the Jewish leaders are jealous of him.
Right.
And so he sees through the whole thing. But the Jews are adamant, no, we want this guy to die.
Yeah.
And Pilate even offers hey, I'll release to you one person, Jesus or this other guy, Barabbas, who was a murderer, basically a terrorist.
Yeah.
And who do the Jews want?
Release Barabbas. Would rather have Barabbas.
Yep.
Even though he's the killer.
Yeah. We want that guy. We don't want Jesus.
I thought it was interesting on the note here on the page that in the creed, we specifically say Pontius Pilate's name.
Yeah. We suffered under Pontius Pilate.
Yeah.
We say that every week in worship.
Let's see if I can circle it. Yeah. But it says, so the reason is that we're saying that this is a historical truth because there really was a guy named Pontius Pilate who was the governor of Judea.
Yep. So it places it historically.
Yeah. It's a real event.
Yep. Well, that's pretty much the six parts of Holy Week.
Yeah. One final thought, though, you were saying, Pastor Luke.
Yeah, so turn to page 100. We have a table here. On the left, if you were to kind of summarize all the things, all the passion, the suffering that Jesus experienced during this week, what are some of the things that you could include, that you could write down here? Some of the things that I wrote down was he was betrayed, he experiences physical pain, he's mocked, he's made fun of, he's wrongfully accused, he's wrongfully convicted of doing something wrong, he's tortured.
So it's not fair.
Yeah, none of this is fair to Jesus.
Right.
He didn't deserve any of this. So he's tortured, he's crucified. We haven't gotten to this yet, because we haven't gotten to, I guess, his actual crucifixion. But On the cross, he's rejected by God the Father. So God the Father actually turns his back on Jesus.
Yeah.
It's pretty awful. On the cross, Jesus is bearing all the sin of humanity. And eventually, finally, he dies.
Yeah.
So these are all the things that Jesus experiences in this week. And if you look onto the right side here, we have Isaiah 53, which was written 700 years before Jesus was born, before Jesus lives. And Isaiah 53 predicts Jesus' passion, his suffering. And if you were to read through Isaiah 53 and compare all the things all the suffering that Jesus experienced, Isaiah 53 describes it all.
Suffering servant, right?
Yes. So I would encourage you to read through Isaiah 53 because it is all pointing forward to Jesus. It's all describing Jesus, the suffering servant.
All right.
All right. Any final thoughts, Pastor Troy?
No, I was just, as I was looking at Isaiah 53, some of you might remember there's a hymn specifically that we sing during Lent, during Holy Week, that comes directly from that. There may be more than one, but one that comes to mind to me. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten, and afflicted. And the hymn is stricken, smitten, and afflicted.
Yep.
Stricken, smitten, and afflicted, see him dying on the tree. On the cross, by God forsaken, or something like that. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, in closing, if you take a look at the Christ connection at the bottom, so there is a reason why Jesus experienced all this horrible suffering. So I'll go ahead and read that. It says, as Jesus endured so much suffering and betrayal, Jesus took our sins upon himself and carried them to the cross. There he took the punishment for the sins of the human race to make us his own. So everything that Jesus experienced, all the suffering, all the wrongdoing, it was all for our sake. It was all for you, that you could be saved, that you could be forgiven. That is why Jesus lovingly, for your sake, experienced his passion.
Yeah.
So
I'll put it back up there again. Passion, suffering.
Yeah.
And it's for you.
For you.
Let's see if I can. No, I can't do it.
All right. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap it up there.
Yeah. Well, it's been fun. Until the next time.
Yeah.
This has been Lesson 24.
All right. Have a good day.
Have a good day.
Bye.